Hey friends, welcome to Shigaraki. So today we are gonna see, what if Deku was born in a world without quirks? So before we start, check out my Patreon page for 18+ exclusive mature content. We will now proceed to the video. A trio of high school girls were chatting avidly among themselves as they were walking down the street until one of them stopped abruptly, catching her friend's attention. Is something the matter, Chako-chan? The purple-skinned girl asked curiously, bending forward to look up at her friend in the face. The two antennae on her head wiggled a bit. Oh, it's nothing, Mina-chan. The brunette laughed to herself, shaking her head. She pointed at the shop in the distance in front of them. Has that tea shop always been there? The shortest girl hummed to herself, nodding in agreement at her two friends. Yeah, I've never seen that shop there before either. I think it was vacant a few weeks ago. Ooh, we should totally check it out, Mina said giddily, hopping up and down with a shrilly cry. I've always wanted to try homemade brewed tea. I've heard it's good for the soul. Hey, and they are probably having a grand opening. The drinks might be free. Worst case scenario, they'd be at discount prices. The short girl chuckled. When the three girls opened the door, a soft melodic chime rang across their ears. It made them imagine a tranquil past with koi ponds in a loud steady stream without the hustle and bustle of city life. Looking around, the decor was definitely chic. Everything screamed extravagant with the shiny mahogany wood and black metal chairs with red velvet cushions. There was even a large art board with a picture of a sleeping dragon hanging on the wall above the cafe's pastry counter. It was a mix of simplicity and creative arts that was both homey and exciting. Oh, hello and welcome to Ryo Oishi, a young male who looked no older than they did greeted them with a light bow. He was dressed in formal black and white suit typical of cafe waiters with a white apron wrapped around his waist. He straightened his tie before looking at them with a huge heartfelt smile. What can I do for you? He asks. All three girls just stared at him as they attempted to block out the shining light surrounding him. Was this his first time working? That smile of his was just something out of this world. Even if he had nothing to sell, he could probably pull in a few customers with it as it is. The girls, minus Suyu, struggled to refrain themselves from jumping the poor waiter. A seat for three. The "Why" practically screamed in his face, causing him to wince back a bit. When they were properly seated, there were a million things running through their minds that they wanted to ask the boy. What was Hi's phone number, or which high school did he go to? Was this his parents' shop? While the other girls were busy raking through their brains over things that had nothing to do with anything, Suyu looked down at the menu in her hand before glancing back up at the green-haired boy. Do you have coffee? Suyu asks bluntly. The boy froze and seemed to be registering her words, taking a little longer and needed, making her two friends glare daggers at her for giving the boy trouble. He twiddled his thumbs together, looking down at his feet. I'm sorry, he finally said, calmly recomposing himself. As this is a traditional tea house, we don't make coffee. My apologies. He ducked down and bowed repeatedly. It's fine, Suyu said, looking out the glass windows passively. Is this your grand opening? She asks. Actually, yes. We had just opened shop about half an hour ago. The boy, whom was named Izuku Midoriya from what his name tag stated, had replied. So that means free samples, right? Suyu continued. Huh. Ah yes. That would be the case. Izuku chuckled at their friend's bluntness, rubbing nervously at the back of his neck. So what would you like? What would you recommend? Ochako started but found a large slimy hand slapping her in the face. 3 of everything to drink. The frog girl stated, ignoring the glare that Ochako was giving her from behind her hand. Eat pastries wouldn't happen to be free too, would they? Mina asked meekly, slightly ashamed at how they were kind of taking advantage of the young boy's hospitality. Actually, for pastries they're half off, Izuku said, smiling, showing not even the least bit offended at their attitude towards him. I'll take the green tea cake, then, Mina said, cheerfully, slightly happy that it wasn't free so as to not take too much advantage of him, but at the same time that it wasn't going to eat at her wallet either. I'll have the toffee cake and the apple pie, Ochako said after a moment. I'll take the unsweetened jasmine jelly and some soy crackers, Suyu said. Will that be all? Izuku asked, writing everything off on his notepad. Seeing everyone give their nod of approval, he smiled. Alright, it'll be ready in a bit. A few moments after he disappeared from their sight, the girls heard an angry and very masculine yelling in the background, almost thinking that it was Izuku throwing a tantrum until they heard him speak back to the other voice in a loud but meek voice. I think you made his boss angry. Mina muttered towards Suyu, who just looked at the other girls with a tilt of her head, slightly confused at her friend's words. Ah, this is heaven, Mina moaned, closing her eyes as she sucked on the spoon. It really goes well with the oolong tea. She gestured towards her cake that she ordered. I gotta say, this is probably the best cake and tea I've ever had. Homemade is definitely in. She held a palm under her cheek as she was whisked away to bliss. Delicious, Ochako said as she started to dig into her snacks while trying a different sip of tea with each bite. No matter which one she tried, each was better than the next. It was a flawless combination. Suyu watched her friends with an open mouth, slightly registering what was going on. You two are so crude and gluttonous. Not very ladylike, at all, she stated before dodging some cream that was flicked her way. Shut up and just drink the tea, Ochako growled from under her food frenzy. She didn't forget about that slap as she glared at her friend. I'm more of a coffee person, Suyu thought to herself, despite being the one who ordered, before picking up one of the tall glasses filled with iced tea. She thinks it was called Dragon Sweet Wine. It was actually pretty good, nice amount of caffeine and not overly sweet as the name would imply. It still wasn't coffee but still really tasty. So how's everything? Izuku came back to check on them, still smiling as sappy as ever. Really good. The best. 9/10. He kind of sweat dropped at the last comment from Suyu but just laughed it off. Soon, after getting their tea, whether from watching the three enjoy their tea or because of the various type of tea that were being offered for all to see through the glass window, more customers had filled in. The place was already almost packed in only 15 minutes after their arrival. Thankfully, none of the other customers seemed to be too extravagant in their orders like the girls had been, but that still left Izuku's hands full as he dashed back and forth, nearly tripping all the way. But even in his slight stress, he didn't seem all that fazed as he continued to give all the customers the same respect he had given them, smiling every step of the way. Then that was when it hit Suyu. Is anyone else working here? She asked, bluntly, catching her friends off guard as they looked around to see. It took them a few frozen seconds to realize that she was right. Only Izuku was working the cash register and catering to the customers all by himself. Right now he was already tending to over 30 patrons of the tea shop. When Izuku came by to check on them and refill one of the iced tea glasses, they decided to ask him about it. Izuku-kun, aren't there any others working here? Ochako asked, feeling even more guilty when realizing that they were just adding more to his workload with their insane order. It was his job, but that didn't mean they had to make it more difficult than necessary, right? Izuku just gave a light-hearted laugh in reply, causing heat to rise up in her cheeks. Well, I'm not really alone. He rubs the back of his neck. I mean, I do have Kachan helping me. And that's more than enough for me. Kachan. They all perk up at the name and watch Uku become nervous from their sudden interest. While Suyu was the only one to notice how Izuku said that name with a certain heartfelt tone, all of them were curious about the relationship the two had, each for their own reason. Mina loved to gossip, Ochako had a slight crush on him, and Suyu for the most part couldn't really be bothered about it really. It was more of a, I have nothing better going on, thing. Why yeah, Kachan and I were looking for a place together, and when we found this little tea shop, that's when I knew we just had to buy it. He scratched at his cheek with an index finger and looked shyly away. Glancing at the girls. Is that your girlfriend? Oh. Izuku spoke up, his voice slightly higher pitched from his surprise. No. He's not my girlfriend. He would probably kill me if he heard anyone say that. He's never had a good sense of humor. He laughed, and each girl found themselves sighing a breath of relief for some reason while Mina crossed her arms at a lack of juicy details. Almost as if on cue, the sound of something smashing in the background shook them out of their conversation, and they all turned in the direction of the sound, expecting a mess of spilled tea in the vicinity, but the rest of the customers were just as oblivious as they were, looking around with wide eyes. Yo, you bastard. An angry spiky-haired ash blonde appeared from behind the counter. He slammed his palms on the counter surface, scaring the patrons who were nearest to him. The glare in his eyes intensified as he stared up at Izuku with what was presumed to be furrowed eyebrows. It was hard to tell from under his bandana. "Stop chatting up the money and get back to work," he roared, making a few of the customers sneer at his rudeness. Noticing their looks, he growled at them. His body temporarily set in flames, quickly turning them meek as they felt the demon towering over them. "Oh, sorry, Kachan," Izuku called back with a slight giggle. The first thing he did it was go up to the customers who had to deal with the man's outburst and fiercely apologizing in earnest while making sure to clean the tea that was spilled. That guy was Kachan. What a jerk. When Izuku came back to tend to them, they asked him about Kachan and if they were related, stating how they looked nothing alike. "Oh, he's my childhood friend from my younger years. We've been through a lot, you know." Izuku gave out a light sigh and seemed to disappear into another time and place. It seemed like he was frozen in place, but he quickly shook his head and continued chatting with the girls. "By the way, are you three from UA Academy?" "Oh, yay. Yeah, that's right, we're UA girls," Mina said proudly, as if just remembering that little detail. UA was one of the most prestigious of the schools around Tokyo and only the most elitist could attend, though the three of them roughly got by on scholarships. Though, Izuku didn't need to know that last part. "I've always considered about going to UA," he started to say, but then Ochako nearly jumped up in his face. "You can still apply. I'm sure if it's you, you can definitely make it in." Her face was beaming as she said every word with all of her might, turning beet red by the second. Her two friends added their own voice of approval, trying to encourage Izuku, but then he raised an embarrassed hand. "Oh, I'm so happy that you three have faith in me," he said, blushing and looking away. "But, I think it's silly for an old man to attend a private high school, isn't it?" The three of them looked at him curiously, frozen at his choice of words. He was joking, right? He barely looked 15. How old are you?" Ochako asked. "I'm turning 21 in a few months," Izuku said, and everything came crashing down on her. He was 5 years older than them. But he doesn't look the least bit old. "Yeah, I can see where that would be a problem. But you can always go to UA Tech," Tsuyu said, not flinching as she took another sip of tea. Ochako wanted to scream at her friend for being so nonchalant about it. Sometimes it irked her that Tsuyu was so passive at critical moments like these. "How old's Kachan?" Mina asked curiously, her antennae wiggling side to side. The guy looked at most in his late 20s. There was no way he was any younger, right? He's just turned 23 a few days ago. Izuku chuckled to himself. "We had a little special birthday party and he went ballistic. He's very sensitive about things despite how he seems. Kinda makes sense considering that he's a childhood friend, I suppose. But then again, you'd think he'd be closer to your age range," Tsuyu pointed out, but Izuku could only laugh at himself at the strangeness of it all. He and Kachan were both strange people. After some time passed, the patrons slowly left until only just the three girls and a few stragglers were left. They really enjoyed chatting with Izuku, and the tea seemed to taste better when they took it slow and watched their surroundings. Then, the door opened. It was opened like normal, nothing big or strange, but it attracted the attention of all of the residents inside, and they all looked towards the door with the bells chiming peacefully as ever, ignorant of the chill that suddenly filled the warm shop. In the doorway there were half a dozen brooding men, all of varying sizes and shapes, wearing black suits with sharp fedora hats slanted over their eyes. One of the men was so large, in fact, that he had to duck down to enter the shop. On his back stuck out giant fleshy tentacle wings that had large gaping eyes at the spines. Staring menacingly at everyone, he towered so high that he continued to duck despite now being inside the shop. Everything went silent as the group trenched on slowly until Izuku approached them. All of the girls wanted to scream at him to run away, to find a place to hide or something, but their bodies were frozen where they stood. They wanted to just run up there, snatch Izuku under their arms and dash the hell out of there past the large group, but they knew they couldn't. This was dangerous territory that would break the ice if they tread wrongly. The one leading the group in front, a man with crimson red and spiky rock-like hair, approached him with heavy steps that almost echoed throughout the entire shop. He slouched, almost kneeling in a strange slouching position. giving Izuku a sneer and tilting his head obnoxiously. It seemed to be a standstill lasting forever, with the man glaring at Izuku and Izuku looking almost fearfully back at the man, neither of them saying anything for a while. When it looked like Izuku was going to say something to tell the group to leave, Tsuyu and the girls wanted to jump in there and slap his mouth shut. Guys like that couldn't be reasoned with. They wanted to say. But the red-haired man beat him to the punch. "Is Aniki here?" he asked with a loud groan, almost sounding annoyed. Izuku paused a bit, his mouth hanging open as if trying to get the words out but realizing that they were probably not appropriate and searched for newer ones to say. After an agonizing second, he returned a stern look back at the man and the girls, except for Tsuyu. Ducked their heads under the table, not wanting to see Izuku be a hero. "Eijiro, you know that Kachan doesn't like to be called Aniki," Izuku finally said with a shake of his head. The girls peeked their heads out with gaping maws, trying to figure out if they heard right. "I'm sorry, Izuku-ni, it's just a bad habit, ya know." The red-haired named Eijiro scratched his rough hair while apologizing. One of the men from behind him, a blonde with a lightning-shaped streak, smacked him from behind his head. "You should show Izuku-kun more respect." He scoffed. "Oh yeah, wanna fight about it, you bastard." Eijiro turned and shouted, jumping at the other man with raised fists. The two of them rolled to the floor in a heap of flying fists and feet. Hey, Eijiro-ni, Denki-ni, stop fighting. This is a public establishment, ya know. We're just here to pay our respects to our ni-sans, the large man from before said in a kind voice that greatly contrasted with his winged tentacle form. Speaking even more strangely from out of a mouth that was at the end of one of his tentacles. The lanky man with slicked down black hair walked over to Izuku and gave him a humble bow. "Please, Izuku. A seat for 7. The man gave him another bow before letting Izuku guide him and their group to their seats. The girls felt their jaws drop to the floor. What reality was this and how'd they get here? The gangsters were being overly polite with Izuku like they knew each other for a long time, even referring to him with strange honorifics. There was no way that Izuku was ever involved with the Yakuza, right? "Yo, who's causing the ruckus?" Izuku's childhood friend, the man with the bandana, walked out from the counter, holding a cooking towel strapped over his shoulders. He sneered angrily at the group in front of him. "What the fuck are you guys doing here?" His crude words and how he presented himself quickly reminded the girls of his character, and they briefly wondered if he was an ex-Yakuza. Looking back at him, they couldn't grasp the concept of ex, immediately brushing aside the idea of him ever leaving. "Nice seeing you, too, Katsuki." A short stump of a boyish man popped out from the crowd and said in mockery, waving his legs back and forth when he took a seat. He quickly found a fist slamming down into his skull before he was set ablaze. "Kachan, don't maim the customers," Izuku cried, holding out his palms. He quickly retreated to get a towel to smack the flames off of the tiny man. "Stop spoiling them, Deku, or they'll never learn." Katsuki frowned as he scanned his eyes over the group. "They're trash anyway, not customers. That's why you're the boss, Aniki." Eijiro cheered, pumping a fist into the air. Ochako came to the conclusion that the red-haired man was a masochist. Or an idiot. Possibly a combination of the two. "Anyway, this is your grand opening, ain't it?" The tiny man from before coughed out pitifully. After Izuku finished smacking most of the flames away, a single flicker was still dancing on top of his round, sticky hair. It became silent with the other man ignoring him. Then, he snickered. "We wanna order everything." That was the second time he was set on fire. Closing time came and the girls left, thanking Izuku a million times for his wonderful service and also apologizing for their rudeness, which he easily brushed off. Only asking them if they could come again, saying he'd enjoy their company. "Still, I couldn't believe Izuku-kun knew those thugs," Mina said with a shiver. "They were so scary looking. Maybe he used to be a Yakuza, too," Tsuyu suggested. The other girls hushed her, bringing their fingers over her mouth. "There's no way that Izuku is a gangster. If anything, it was Katsuki-san who was the gangster. His gang probably just followed him everywhere he went, including when he and Izuku-kun hung out." The two reasoned. Tsuyu just shrugged, finding no fault in their words. "Oh no." Ochako suddenly jumped up. "I forgot my cell phone. You probably left it at the tea shop. Let's go get it." The three of them quickly ran back, hoping that the shop wasn't closed. Yeten smiled when they saw the lighting was still on. They ran to the window and saw Izuku in the background as he was clearing the tables and wiping them clean. They were going to bang on the window to ask him to let them in when out of nowhere Katsuki appeared like a crazed murderous demon from some horror flick. The girls became silent. The ashen blonde slowly stalked towards the ignorant Izuku as he continued whistling to himself as he cleaned, smiling all the way with closed blissful eyes. When he was within pouncing distance of Izuku, he stretched his arms out to block any escape routes. A darkness covered his eyes and his mouth was curved in a tiresome crazed frown. The girls were about to scream at Izuku to get away, but it was too late. When he turned around, he quickly found him's elf forced onto the table with both wrists pinned. All of the expensive tableware fell to the ground, shattering. Izuku looked up fearfully at Katsuki, who was glaring him down, and then Katsuki leaned down and kissed him. Izuku blushed madly but didn't fight back the kiss. Eventually he was going far as deepening it also, returning the gesture in full fold. The girls froze and broke like shatter. Ed glass before they turned multiple shades of crimson. They all slid to the floor and laid their backs against the wall under the window. Ochako was opening and shutting her mouth repeatedly from between her friends. No words were coming out until finally she shook her head. I don't think I need my cell phone anytime soon. I can get it back tomorrow, right? She smiled, but her red face belied what she was actually thinking. Her friends nodded in understanding as they got up to walk back home together. Soft light peeked through the blinds as the sun was rising, slowly panning over the blankets until they were met with closed eyes. The porcelain lids twitched a bit, struggling with all their might to stay shut. Until finally they gave into their losing battle and slowly parted to gaze at the new day. Izuku Midoriya rose from under the covers, sitting up as they fell off of his bare chest. He lazily slouched in a crooked bent and opened his mouth wide to yawn, smacking his lips. He blinked a bit, trying to get some bearing on his surroundings. There was still some fresh drool on his chin. On his backside was the faint telling of multiple white scars, crisscrossing and overlapping, even whiter than his own tender flesh. He was a lean man. He had tight muscles and was sporting a nice six-pack, both of which were quite difficult to spot from under anything short of a gym spandex. Saint kind of shirts tended to hide his muscular form pretty well. Personally, it was better that way. He preferred looking meek and timid so as to not draw in any attention, though his young freckled face, small stature, and soft disposition still drew in plenty of onlookers. Much to the dismay of Katsuki Bakugo. Both of them had settled for a calmer life and wanted nothing more. It was a well-deserved solace after those few heated years that seemed so long ago. He shook his head. That was the past and this was the present. A loud snore brought him out of his reprieve and he turned to look at the lump beside him. The covers were rising and falling in a dramatically lazy fashion. There was an arm sticking out from near the headboard and a leg was hanging out over Katsuki's side of the bed. It brought a toothy grin to Izuku's face. He was cute in moments like these. He was about to get up when suddenly an arm snaked its way around his waist and pinned him back down. He tried to struggle but the grip was as strong as steel. When he looked back up from where he laid, he found Katsuki leaning over him with a fierce gaze. Somehow he had a blindfold-like shadow that covered his upper face with only his eyes being fully visible. "Where do you think you're going, Deku?" The older man sneered, baring his fangs out. Smoke seeped from his mouth as flames built in his throat. The ashen blonde looked pissed and upset, like he was about to explode at the slightest motion, and if this was anybody else Izuku might have actually been a little scared. But he was used to Kachan's behavior, so he just smiled back up at him. That personality of his was a quirk, ha, all on its own. It was quite endearing actually, especially when he was a bit on the possessive side. "Good morning to you, too, Kachan," Izuku said softly, raising his head only enough so that he could nuzzle his nose against Katsuki's, but the other didn't relent in his fierce gaze. "Shut it, fag," Katsuki growled, pushing his head past Izuku's and in between the nook at his shoulders. He took a hard bite that made Izuku gasp and moan in shock. "It's your fault that we broke a few of our merch last night due to your clumsiness. Now we gotta scrounge more money for replacements," he roared in a soft whisper as he kept biting lower and lower, reaching Izuku's chest. Izuku was at a loss for words. All of his words were just hitting the upper roof of his throat, but none were able to come out. He was none the worst for wear at what his significant other had said, though. It was just the incessant prodding from Katsuki that was cutting off all stimulation to his brain into something else. He wanted to tell Katsuki that he had broken 10 times the clay kettles and other silverware when Katsuki took him down last night compared to what he broke during work hours. It would have made him angry and more passionate, but Izuku couldn't have that now. They had to get ready for work. And speaking of, he'd have to mock. He's sure to clean extra well down there in the work area, too. He inwardly frowned. The two of them didn't exactly leave the place spotless, if you know what I mean. Come on, we gotta get ready for work. Izuku moaned, and tried pushing Katsuki off of his smaller form, but the action only made the other man get more intense as he became more stubborn. Katsuki frowned at him and he gave off a slight, unnerving stare that threw off even him, despite him being well used to his lover's behaviors. You really wanna work, don't ya, asshole? Katsuki started, pressing their foreheads hard against each other. Izuku felt his body become hot as the other's skin was almost literally on fire with smoke exuding from his pores. You must really want to get under the skirts of those high schooler bitches from the other day. He pressed his forehead down harder, causing Izuku's head to sink into the pillow. You fucking pedophile. He snarled with sharp fangs. Izuku's will just broke right there and then. Maybe he was a masochist. Maybe Katsuki Bakugo was too hot, literally and figuratively. Maybe Katsuki actually a nice guy with a hidden heart of gold. Maybe Katsuki was just actually an honest-to-goodness asshole. Maybe cruel words were just a trigger to something within him. Maybe he was a slut that liked to be abused. Maybe there was something about having your first love being as obsessed with you as you were with them. Maybe there was something about the mutual love that they shared with one another that no other person could do for them. Maybe it was because only they could really understand each other in that special way. Maybe it was a certain way the light shined down from the sun over them. Maybe it was the nice, cool, crisp morning air. Maybe water was blue. Maybe there was too many maybes in these sentences. But no matter what maybes ran through his head, Izuku only had one real thought. He was thankful that both of them were already naked since last night's little escapade. Though, mentally, he had to add their bedsheets and possibly everything else in their bedroom to the list of things that had to be run through a nice thorough wash. Uraka Saaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaa His glasses were tinted so his eyes were hidden behind their lenses. He looked around incessantly for the girl in question but found her missing since lunch break. For that matter, he paused and looked around only to see a few more empty seats than what should have been appropriate. The appropriate number being 0. The missing students that he could discern missing were probably Mina and Tsuyu, Ochako's best friends. How dare they? Didn't these girls take their classes seriously? As the class president, he couldn't let this go. He had to hunt down those girls and take them back to class. Even if he had to use force. He looked up at the clock and saw that it was a minute before the start of class. Could he leave class now and get them before the teacher comes? No, it was impossible. He sat back down in his seat and held his temples by his index and middle fingers. On one hand, he'd be besmirching the honor of UA Academy if he left. Not to mention that he was the class president. That wouldn't look good at all. And his brothers would be so disappointed in him. And he could never look them in their eyes again if they did. On the other hand, he'll be detaining 3 lawless criminals. He'll be able to reform them of their ways and lead them into a brighter future, just like what awaits all noble students of this fine establishment. And maybe, just maybe, the school and his brothers could look past his dark deed if he was able to accomplish his goal. But that was a huge maybe. No, he thought with stars in his eyes. I have to do this, for them. For their future. Then he abruptly stood and shot his hand up in the air just as the teacher came in. He was breathing heavily looking. Like he had ran through a marathon and stared down intently at his desk. Everyone looked at the class president in shock and surprise while the teacher just eyed him with disinterest, only taking to wrap his scarf more comfortably around his neck. What is it, Tenya Iida-kun? The messy-looking man asked. I have to. The boy shot his head up and looked seriously at his teacher with sweat running down his chin. He had to let the teacher know. It was of the utmost importance. I have to go to the bathroom. Quote. There was a pause. Then the teacher blinked once and yawned. Everyone else, on the other hand, could only just stare more in shock. There was just something about the way he said it and how utterly serious he was. Being that made them become silent. They couldn't even tell if it was a joke or not. Knock yourself out, kid. The teacher waved a hand while he was stuffing his feet into a sleeping bag that he pulled out from under his desk. We won't miss you, he adds as he finishes zipping it up, completely covering his entire body with only his head sticking out from the hole. Thank you, sir. Tenya gave a stern salute before he started the engines in his legs and shot out of class, creating turbulence that sent clothes and paper fluttering everywhere. A few girls squealed and tried to hold their skirts down. Must be number 2, Mr. Aizawa said with a shrug and continued on with his class. Aren't we forgetting something? Suyu asked out loud while absent-mindedly taking a bite of her soy cracker. She leaned back into the cushion of the booth, looking upward at the ceiling. Her two friends paused, lightning striking in the background and a shadow fell over their eyes. We forgot, they mumbled. Both girls looked at each other in the eye and nodded sternly. Then, Ochako and Mina shot their hands up. Izuku-kun, Midoriya-kun. We need a refill please. They cried out. Coming right up. Izuku chuckled. He was balancing a few serving trays between both of his hands and one of his shoulders, placing each one to their respective locations before coming over to the three girls. You girls had black tea, nay. He smiled. He started to pour it into their cups when they nodded before refilling the tea kettle. You three are pretty active, aren't you? He sighed, shaking a head. I feel old thinking about my youth. You're not that old, Izuku-kun. Ochako puffed out her cheeks and breathed out of her nostrils with a look of determination that was more indulgent of a young preschooler. Izuku chuckled lightly to himself at the thought. She was cute. On second thought, she was adorable. If he had a daughter, he'd want her to be like Ochako. Then his mood dropped the instant it rose. Though, he loved Katsuki, one of the downsides of their relationship involved the lack of child making. If I was a girl, I'd probably already have 4 kids, he thought pathetically. Ochako-chan, you offended, Midoriya-kun. Mina elbowed her friend and glared at her. The other girl looked down passively. Whoa, no. That's not it. Izuku shot out his palms and gestured at them. I was just thinking, he rubbed the back of his neck and laughed facilely. It's just, I thought it would be nice to have a daughter like you Ochako-chan, he said sincerely. Ochako blushed heavily and laid her chin on the tabletop. Thank you, Izuku-kun. Ha ha ha. Heard that Suyu. Mina waved over at her friend from the other side of Ochako. He said that he thinks of her as a daughter. She roared in laughter. Yep, Suyu nodded, not taking the accusation in Mina's tone. Guys. Ochako whined and proceeded to beat Mina lightly with both fists, only making the purple girl laugh more. Youth. Izuku thought as a somber expression filled his face. I barely remember when the last time I smiled with my friends. No, I couldn't have friends back then. He absently hugged his chest, moving his hands up and down his sides. I can't think about that. I can't. Tears started to well in the corner of his eyes. Suyu was the only one to notice the sudden change in the atmosphere and looked up in shock to see Izuku about to go into a nervous meltdown. She slowly raised one of her webbed hands and was just about to tug onto the hem of his sleeves when the door to the store blasted open. Everyone immediately stopped what they were doing, and Izuku quickly wiped away invisible tears and donned his server's smile. It was a surprise that the door didn't shatter from the force that opened it. Who? A young boy with glasses, dragged his feet into the store. He was hung over, looking like he was ready to collapse. Dear owner of this fine establishment, he continued huffing and puffing. He walked closer to the cash register. Do you happen to know if you've seen these girls? He placed down a set of photos on the counter before falling over and hitting his face on the marble floor. Iida-kun. The 3 girls gasped, in shock at the sight of their class president. Izuku dropped his smile and rushed over to the boy. Hey, kid, are you alright? He leaned down and laid the boy's head into his lap. Kachan. Can you give me a wet towel and some water? What the fuck is going on back there? Katsuki popped his head out, ignoring the crowd's loud gasping, and walked over to Izuku and handing him the tools. His gaze. Fell over the set of photos on the cash register and looked from the boy to Izuku and back to the photos as he picked them up. The fuck? He pulled the photos down and looked at the boy again. He eyed the 3 girls in the back. Is this guy a stalker? Please, Kachan, take him to the back room. I'll deal with him in a bit, Izuku said, calmly, after shaking off his initial surprise. Yeah, sure, whatever. Katsuki roughly grabbed the unconscious boy and slung him over his shoulders like a sack of potatoes before marching behind the counter and disappearing behind the backroom door. A loud clang was heard and Izuku winced. It sounded like he had thrown the poor boy over the cleaning supply without a care. Actually, that's probably what happened. Izuku rushed to clean up as quickly as he possibly could before going to join his partner in the back room. But he was stopped by the high school trio as they appeared in front of him with pleading looks. Izuku, Midoriya, they called to him. Was that Iida-kun? He's our friend. If he's hurt, we need to see him. What was he to stop them? All right, girls, follow me. He gestured with a short wave, lifting the counter bar and letting them through. He followed after them. The fuck? Katsuki said as soon as he saw them come in through the door. Why are the high schoolers here? Apparently Iida-kun, was it, his friends WITH them and they were worried about him. Izuku clasped his hands together and begged Katsuki to not be furious with him, giving him big puppy eyes while the other just scoffed at him, brushing off invisible dirt. Whatever. None of my business. Katsuki turned back to look at the still unconscious boy who was laid all over the buckets, mops, and brooms. His arms and legs were crooked and bent, in ways that looked downright uncomfortable. His head was tilted to the side with his mouth slightly parted as drool was leaking down the corner of his mouth. He was snoring as a snot bubble inflated and deflated out of one of his nostrils. Katsuki rolled his eyes before slapping the boy several times. Hey, wake up, he said, angrily. Kachan tilde. Izuku cried out in shock at Katsuki's rough handling. He fisted his hands into the back of the ashen blonde's shoulders. Let me do it. He walked past Katsuki and bent over the boy, placing a palm over his forehead while massaging his cheek. Hey, kid, are you alright? He cooed softly as he repeated the motions a bit. He picked up the cup of water and raised it to the boy's open mouth, tilting it gently so as to not drown him in it. Everyone around him watched in awe as Izuku placed all of his focus on taking care of the well-being of the boy under him, taking meticulous care with everything he did. His dark brows were furrowed and some sweat was leaking down his porcelain skin. When he needed to switch the towels, Tenya began to choke on his own spit, and muttered a few incoherent words. Oh, what's that? Izuku asked and placed his ear against Tenya's chest to gauge his heart's beats before hovering over the tall boy's open mouth. He patted him in the back of his neck to help dislodge the spit stuck in his throat. Have you seen those girls, my kind sir? Tenya gasped out, his voice wheezed and hacked. He stuck his right hand high into the air as if trying to snatch the stars out of the sky before his arm fell back down. Heaven, he said weakly. It was like he was in a dream-like state. Here, maybe this will make him stop being retarded. Katsuki came over and handed some herbal tea, freshly warmed, to pour down his throat. It seemed to work wonders as Tenya started sipping slightly before gulping down the entire concoction like a mad thirsty camel. A new source of energy burned in him as all of the fatigue he had from earlier was gone. Sirs. He shot up, narrowly missing Izuku's head, and turned to look at them with panic in his eyes from behind his lenses. Have you seen the girls in my photos? It's urgent I retrieve them and return them to class. Oh, that's what we forgot. The 3 males turned and looked at Ochako, who bonked herself on the head playfully. Her tongue was sticking out as she winced. My bad. Them. Katsuki thumbed over his shoulders at the girls. Take them, stalker boy, we already got their money. He added with indifference. Hey. The girls all proclaimed together, looking at him with narrowed eyes. What a jerk. Wait, Izuku said, grabbing Iida by his shoulders and lightly pushed him back down into a sitting position. Sit down, you seem to be suffering from a bit of dizziness. But I must get these girls back to their rightful place in society. Iida started, but Izuku placed a finger over his lips to silence him. That's fine and dandy, but we need to focus on you children's health first. You look like you were waist deep in hell. He placed the back of his palm over the boy's forehead and frowned like a mother would. You're so hot. Did you get a flu from just running around or something? That's no good. Who cares about school if you're gonna kill yourself over it? If we don't attend school, we'll never be molded properly to fit into society. And our lives will be ruined. Quote, it's just a few measly moments, heck even if it's the whole day, that doesn't matter. Kids these days need to breathe in and take their life by the horns. You can worry about that garbage when you become adults. You're only a kid once. Hey, I hope you don't mind me asking, sir, but shouldn't you be in school, too? Iida finally said after studying Izuku for a bit. This caused Katsuki to stifle his chuckle as he held a hand over his mouth in an attempt to quiet his laughter. Which was poorly done, and the green-haired man glared at him. It only made it worse as he burst into full-on, unrelenting guffaws. I'm actually turning 21 in a few, Izuku stated with a shake of his head. Why did people keep mistaking him for a young high school freshman? He fed out his cheeks in annoyance while crossing his arms. He turned on his heel so that his back was facing the glasses boy. I'm so sorry, Iida said loudly. It's just you look so young, sir. He bowed down stiffly. It looked like his body was ready to snap in half at the gesture. It's fine, Izuku said, waving a hand mildly. If anything, he should be grateful and take it as a compliment. I'm used to it. You can stop apologizing now. Yeah, weren't you here for a reason? Katsuki asked. Why were you dead when you got here? Oh, Iida shot up with both of his hands at his sides. I was so tired from running all over the city looking for those girls in the photos. I had already checked over 43 establishments and locations by the time I got here. 43. Dang. You must have been running around all day, The ashen blonde snorted, slightly impressed. Actually, I just left school about 10 minutes ago. Tenya blushed at the looks he was receiving from everyone. He rubbed the back of his neck and chuckled weakly. Looking up. Then he froze when his eyes finally registered the trio near the doorway. His jaw seemed to drop to the floor and he turned to stone, only managing to point a finger at them before he collapsed sideways onto the ground like a fallen statue. Oh boy, this kid is just full of surprises, ain't he? The blonde raised an eyebrow before walking over to him and giving him a slightly slight hard kick to the head, earning a strange crack sound. He gave him a few more kicks. Kachan. Bakugo-san. Everyone chastised him, but he just shoved his hands in his pockets and scoffed. Twirling on his heels and walking over to Izuku. It didn't take as long as before to wake up the guy, and when he finally did, he took the 3 girls with him, but not before blasting off a lecture. A mile a minute at them, making each of the girls think about the damages they've done, or at least the damages he considered in his head. Funnily enough, it turns out that the girls had forgotten all about their school when they came back to receive their friend's, Ochako's, phone, only to be lured in with the thought of tea and snacks, quickly forgetting about their situation as students. They were sincerely apologetic to the boy, who was the class president, and even apologized for overextending their stay due to Iida-kun's prodding at Izuku's cafe despite his protest. And that's what happened today. Izuku chuckled with closed eyes as he was drying a few cups with a towel. He looked back at the man sitting at the stool from the other side of the sea. Counter, who was taking generous sips of his own hot cup. The man was a head taller than him. He had blazing charcoal hair that shot backwards like a burning flame. It resembled the feathers of a raven, and his mouth was a thick, curved beak. He gave off the feelings of a soldier from a bygone era with his sharp and stern eyes. He was wearing a white dress shirt and he slung his suit jacket over the stool beside him. Nearby on the counter, his fedora was sitting down, slightly upturned. He took more generous sips of his tea, drinking it in that old-fashioned style. The proper way tea should have. Been drunk with a hand around the cup and palm placed under it. Not like a man trying to chug alcohol down his throat like a raving drunk lunatic. It reminded Izuku exactly why he always turned to him for advice or just idle chit-chat. When he finally placed the cup down, he gave a deep long sigh of relief, letting hot air escape his lips. It sounds like you have had quite the adventure today, Midoriya-ni. He closed an eye and smirked at the younger-looking man. He sighed again. So, how is the civilian life treating you? The raven-like man asked. It's great. Izuku replied with a huge smile. He bent over to his workstation to pick up a new cup to dry. Are you happy? The man asked, leaning the side of his head on his palm. He shot the other man an indescribable look. It's difficult to say at the moment since we've only just moved in a week ago and only started shop yesterday, but yeah, I think we might have a nice and normal life here. He says and scratches his chin with a finger. Finally. Do you wish to take back your old life that was stolen from you, Midoriya-nisama? The man added. There was almost hidden venom and accusation in his tone. The question seemed to have struck a chord in Izuku and it was silent for a moment, but then the green-haired male returned to his original smiling face. Though there was a shadow cast over his eyes that only a few with discernible eyes could catch. That life was taken away from me by someone long gone. We can't change the past, Tokiyami-kun. Izuku paused again and looked at his reflection on the surface of the cup he was cleaning. He looked at his own reflection knowingly and a soft smile was on his face again. We can only hope for a better future because that's the only thing we can change. That's a good answer, Tokiyami said with a smirk. He took another sip of tea. All Might would have been proud of you. Yeah, but he's in a better place now. That he is. With that, the raven-like man placed a few coins on the counter before tossing his jacket over his shoulders, donning his hat. The bell chimes when he leaves through the door and Izuku can't help but feel like that it was both an ominous sign and a spark of hope. Omake. Well, Midoriya-nisama, that sounds like the life. Tokiyami chuckled before taking a sip from his cup. He smirked from under his lips and looked up at Izuku. Yeah, I can't believe so many crazy things happened today. It's like nothing really changed at all, nay. The man said with a chuckle, combing his fingers through the back of his messy locks. Yeah, it doesn't seem to have changed much. Tokiyami laughed, not removing the cup from his mouth yet so his words were slightly muffled. It was silent as the raven-like man took loud sips that slowly sputtered as the volume of his refreshment began to dwindle. He placed the cup down and looked seriously at Izuku. But, he began, did you have to seriously mention about what position you did this morning and how Bakugo-kun entered you? I mean, I'm your friend and all, but I'm not sure if I should be privy to those kind of details. Izuku's face burned red at the accusation in the raven-like man's words. He hadn't realized that he was babbling everything about today, he was just so excited from everything that he wanted to get it all off his chest. I mean, you got me all hot and bothered, too. Toko. Yami smirked devilishly at him and leaned over the counter. He trailed a finger through the buttons of his shirt. Were you trying to turn me on? Just then, Katsuki walked by in the ashen blonde frock. He did to punch the bird man's head into the ground without hesitation. He knocked him unconscious and broke half of the counter as it caved in. Tokiyami was lying flat on the ground with a dopey smile plastered on his face. Eyes swirling around like a whirlpool. The fuck's going on? Katsuki growled before grabbing Izuku roughly by his upper arm. I'm the only one who's allowed to fuck you. Are you trying to piss me off here, asshole? Quote. He rushed the two of them upstairs and Izuku would later find himself not being able to walk for a few days and in turn the shop was closed. And that was the start of an endless cycle as the more the shop closed, the more Izuku would be unable to walk. Katsuki clapped his hands together. Okay, finished. He raked a hand through his spiky blonde hair before sitting down at the table. Izuku smiled happily at his partner from across the table. The aroma flowing from the sets of pastries and glass of tea were overwhelming. He felt his mouth water and had tea. Wipe away a strand of drool that fell from the corner of his lips. Katsuki really outdone himself this time. Bon appetit. The young man cried out before he dug into the closest pastry, a square cut of bread made from green tea. He moaned through a full mouth as sweet coconut cream flowed onto his tongue, followed by the accent of ground dried peanuts and the tang of habanero peppers. KK Kachan. Hot, hot, he screeched, nearly choking on his own spit. He reached over to grab one of the iced teas that Katsuki had made, chugging it down as much as he possibly could but stopped. His eyes opened wide as he froze in shock before slamming the cup down, choking. The tea was even spicier than the tea bread. What was in that? Izuku's vision began to blur as tear, snot, and drool poured out of him so rapidly that he feared he would die of dehydration. I need milk. He tried to get up to rush towards the refrigerator but found himself stopped by Katsuki, who towered over him with a menacing smirk plastered on his lips. "Where do you think you are going, fucking nerd?" the blonde asked haughtily. "But, Kachan," he mumbled through his mouth. "What? You can't stand spicy food?" Katsuki laughed, bending forward so that both of their foreheads bumped together. "How the fuck was I supposed to know that, asshole?" His evil grin stretched even wider as he said this. Izuku couldn't stand it anymore and just closed his eyes and covered his mouth with both hands. Katsuki wasn't going to let him remove the capsaicin from his mouth. He planned this from the very beginning. The only choice he had left was just to endure it until it went away. Which God knew how long that would take. "Are you really that much of a pussy, Deku?" Katsuki laughed and forced Izuku to remove his hands away from his mouth. He roughly held the younger man by the jaw with a hand, forcing his mouth open with the other. Then he started to pull out Izuku's tongue. "Kothan." Izuku pouted. "I guess I have to do everything for you, huh?" Katsuki said before he pulled Izuku's face and tongue closer to him and started sucking on his partner's tongue, French kissing him. He roughly pressed against Izuku and pushed the both of them up against a wall, still sucking on Izuku's tongue, and when he got tired of that he started digging his own tongue deep into the inner walls of Izuku's mouth. Kachan. Izuku moaned, but Katsuki didn't relent in his bestial fury, only getting rougher and harder. Izuku's legs started to fall limp, but he didn't find himself falling to the floor. Through pure force, Atsuki's aggressive hands nailed his wrists high above his head on the wall and held up the entirety of his weight. Izuku's head was starting to spin in circles now. Whether it was from the heat of spicy peppers or from Katsuki's intense make-out session, he wasn't sure, but he soon found himself losing consciousness before everything turned black. Moments later, he found himself waking up on the couch, wrapped in a tight bundle. A sweet scent filled his nostrils and he turned in their direction to see a stack of dango, some cream cake, and some milk drinks lying on the coffee table. It looked fresh. He opened his eyes wide in shock when he felt his pillow being fluffed and looked up to stare Katsuki in the eye. The blonde stared at him for a few seconds before looking away with a red tint filling his cheeks. "Sorry about tricking you into eating the peppers." Katsuki mumbled in apology. "It's fine, Kachan." Izuku sat up and smiled at his lover. He paused for a moment before adding, "If you wanted to kiss me, all you had to do was ask." But then his face heated up and he quickly averted his eyes from Katsuki's when they made direct eye contact. "Though, you were really sexy." The appearance of Izuku's shriveled form as he knelt down on the couch with a twist of his torso wrapped in the warm blankets made the other man explode. "Damnit, fucking Deku," Katsuki growled as his own face turned even redder at the cute pout Izuku was giving him. "Why the fuck do you have to be so damn cute?" The blonde grabbed his partner by the shoulders and forced him to lay back into the couch. They then made out for a second time that morning. Downstairs, the door to the shop's entrance squeaked as it slowly opened, ringing the chimes melodiously. Once the door was wide enough, head popped up from behind the door's frame. Another head soon followed suit, appearing above the first. Then lastly, the third head appeared above that one. "You think we can go in?" the second head, Ochako, asked. She raised a hand over her eyes as she scanned the empty shop with narrow eyes. "I don't think they're opened yet." "Don't be silly." The first head, Mina, replied with a smirk. "I'm sure we're just really early. I mean, none of the other shops are closed on a Saturday." The reddish-purple girl replied confidently. "How am I on top?" The third head, Froggy, Suyu, asked with a puzzled look. "I mean, I am the shortest in our whole class and I'm not even standing on anything." She looked down only to see her two friends gone. They wandering around in the shop, picking up random salt shakers and napkin holders. She looked down again and briefly wondered where her feet were, but then her eyes caught a small square poster to her side. "Hey, girls." Suyu quickly grabbed it, giving it a brief read, then running into the shop after her friends. "Hey, Ochako-chan, Mina-chan." She held the poster in her hand, waving it at them. "Ooh. Do you think this dragon is really made out of sapphire?" Mina knelt down and poked the large statue with her finger. She smirked and poked it several more times. No way. Ochako formed an X with her arms. There's no way that they see. Old have such a large piece of sapphire. Quote. Unless Bakugo-san stole it. Mina giggled mischievously at her friend, sticking her tongue out at the bright brunette. Yua, maybe. Ochako eyed the sapphire statue longingly. Ochako-chan. Mina-chan. Look at this poster. Suyu appeared, jumping up and down to get their attention. What's wrong, Suyu-chan? Ochako asked curiously. Yeah, you mad? Ochako-chan forget about the precious sapphire that she was going to steal. Mina laughed. Yay, wait, no I wasn't. Mina-chan, you big meanie. Ochako turned and started flailing her arms at the insect girl. We all know that you have money problems. And besides, it's okay if you steal from a thief. Mina raised her arms over her head to block Ochako's blows. Giggling all the way. Mina-chan, you know that I'm sensitive about that. The brunette groaned with her face steaming red in embarrassment. Guys. Suyu tried pushing the poster between the two of them but they couldn't see it as they were fighting amongst each other. Paying her little to no mind. The frog girl took a few steps back and stood there. Her lips forming a thin line. Mina-chan, apologize. Ochako whined. She kept ling the other girl who only grew more boisterous, laughing all the way. Okay, I'm sorry. Mina finally apologized after a while but the grin that stayed plastered to her face said otherwise. Ochako huffed and frowned at her friend. This was the best she could get from the insect girl so she begrudgingly accepted the apology. A familiar voice pulled her out of her thoughts. Izuku-kun. She looked around but didn't see him. Ochako. Suyu stepped in front of Ochako, blocking her way. She pulled up her small poster and blocked her friend with it, slamming it into her face. Suyu-chan, don't you start, too. Ochako complained. I think I heard Izuku-kun. She pushed the poster out of her way and raised her ear to gauge where the voices were coming from. Hey, I hear him too, now. Mina jumped up and walked up besides the brunette. The two of them were walking slowly, looking around, until they found a case of stairs nearby. Should we go up? The sounds of Izuku's voice accompanied by the static and echoes of something loud and booming brought them back to their attention. Ochako was the first one to go up the stairs. Mina followed suit. Suyu looked up at her friends from the base of the stairs and frowned, hugging the posters in her arms. She looked to her left then to her right, pausing. This wasn't right. But then she reasoned, she should just make sure that they didn't do anything stupid and followed them soon after. Ah! Ochako's scream sounded just as Suyu got to the top of the stairs. Her and Mina were both blue with a hand over the mouths and were pointing accusing fingers in front of her. There, Izuku was sitting down on a couch. A blanket was draped over him. On Izuku's lap, a blond man with spiky hair was laying his head down. The two of them were watching the television but was interrupted by the screeching from her two friends. Izuku froze in shock while the other man in question abruptly sat up from Izuku's lap to glare at the intruding girls. What the fuck? The man snarled when he recognized them. What are the round face, antennae head, and frog brat bitches doing here? Oh my god. Ochako squealed again, ignoring the man's offensive remark. Izuku-kun's cheating on Katsuki-san. Suyu looked at the poster in her hands and tossed it away. It was pointless anyway. So you're not a random guy who's trying to steal Izuku's virginity? Ochako and Mina asked with wide eyes. The two of them were staring at Katsuki intently, trying to see if he really was who he said he was. His virginity's been long gone, Katsuki thought, annoyed. An angry tick appeared over his head as he tried to suppress the urge to pummel the three girls who invaded their home. Are you sure? Mina asked, suspiciously. Yeah, how can we be sure that you're Katsuki-san? Ochako frowned at him, hugging her arms around her friend's shoulders. How the hell can I prove that? You don't even know me. Katsuki felt another tick appear over his head. Then another. And another. It was bad enough that they interrupted his and Izuku's special alone time. Not like the old gang didn't do that enough. But they even had the galls to question if he was him. Seriously. If it wasn't illegal, he'd have them dumped somewhere where the sun don't shine. He's definitely as mean as Katsuki-san. Mina pointed out. Yeah, but that's not enough. Ochako said. Another tick. Okay, that was it. Katsuki raised a fist and was about to explode their faces off in a fiery blaze until he felt Izuku's hand pull him back, stopping him. Girls, Izuku said with a pained, weak smile. I'm not sure what's going on. But this is Kachan. The two girls looked to one another before looking back at the two men. Their jaws nearly dropped to the floor at the realization. He is, they said together. In the background, Suyu was poking the glass of the aquarium, messing with the fishes. Yeah, Izuku admitted with a sweat drop. He felt like he should apologize for some reason with the looks they were giving him. Like he was lying or hiding Katsuki all this time. So why did you think Kachan was someone else? Izuku decided to ask. He has hair. He's younger looking. What do you mean I have hair and look younger? You bitches wanna start something. Katsuki started growling as fire filled his throat. A killer aura surrounded him but Uku held him down before he did anything. Mina pulled out a notebook and started sketching something into it before showing Izuku. This is what Katsuki-san looks like. On the notebook, there was a rude drawing of a dinosaur fish thing wearing a bandana, breathing fire and slamming its head against a rock. And this is what he looks like right now. Then she started sketching again before showing him another picture. This one was of a dinosaur fish thing breathing fire and slamming its head against a rock, but without a bandana. Izuku chuckled pathetically and sweat dropped again. So, you couldn't recognize him without his bandana. He laughed. Katsuki growled and punched him in the back of the head. Hey, what was that for, Kachan? Izuku laughed again, though not as strongly as before. He looked back up at his partner, smiling. I think it's adorable that your bandana is your trademark. Katsuki frowned at the comment, mumbling to himself. He looked away from Izuku with a light blush tinting his cheeks. Fucking Deku-kun. He held a palm over his face, trying to wipe the feeling away. When Izuku saw his lover being embarrassed, he smiled at him. Reaching a hand over towards Katsuki's, he gently intertwined their fingers together, causing Katsuki to look back down at him. Their eyes locked on one another's as his gaze fell over Izuku's. Fucking moron, Katsuki chewed on his lips a bit before leaning his head down, closer towards Izuku. Their noses brushed against each other's just as the distance between their lips were closing. Then, ooh, is that cake I smell? Ochako's loud and happy voice broke up their almost kiss and the two men looked up to see her and her friends standing over a table with tea and snacks laid out. Oi, round face, what do you think you are doing? Katsuki yelled. His face was flushed entirely red now. He couldn't believe he had forgotten about those intruders. Ochako looked pitifully at him, like she was about to cry, putting the cake in her hand back down. He eyed the cake that she was holding curiously before the gears started turning in his head. Kachan. Izuku looked on worriedly at him. Never mind, Katsuki said, darkly. Red devil horns and a pointed tail seemed to sprout from his body. He was smiling sweetly at the girls. You guys can help us. Me and Deku-chan here were testing out some new recipes for the shop. Maybe you guys can help us out. Izuku looked even more distressed as he looked from Katsuki then to the girls then back again. His eyes were wide and he jumped up, trying to stop the girls but was already too late. One by one, they had already started taking bites out of the various tea snacks. I call it the dragon's specialty. Katsuki said, proudly, crossing his arms. It's Riwi Dewish Sush. Ochako was the first to speak. Her mouth was puffed out as crumbs fell out with every word. She palmed her cheek with a hand, looking like she was in bliss. Mina was also stuffing her face. Only tease. Uyu was more hesitant in eating the free snacks, taking little licks of the snacks, caring to make sure not to choke herself. Then as if on cue, the three girls' faces filled red. Sweat started raining heavily down their skin and they felt their hearts cave in on themselves. Just like Izuku before them, all three of them had begun to reach for the various iced hot tea on the table and started hugging them down like there was no tomorrow only to drop them in shock halfway through. Water. Water. Milk. We need milk. The girls started to panic and Katsuki only stood there laughing like the devil he was. Izuku frowned at the sight before him and he elbowed Katsuki in the rib. What did I do? Katsuki complained. That was mean of you, Kachan. The green-haired man said, glaring at him. Ha ha ha, grow a spine, Deku. They need to learn their lesson. Katsuki laughed and patted Izuku on the back, but he wasn't the slightest bit amused. And what lesson is that, may I ask? Don't piss me off. Katsuki laughed again just as a teakettle flew past him. It exploded on the wall behind him. He opened one eye, no longer laughing. His earlier amusement was wiped from his face. Now, just then, a chair came barreling towards him and he couldn't dodge in time, half due to his surprise and half due to his moment being ruined. Mostly from his moment being ruined. The specially hand-carved oak OD chair shattered into a million pieces and he was looking less and less amused, shrugging off the blow. Looking at the direction that their things were coming from, he spied Ochako and her friends touching everything with her hands. Tripping and going mad from the heat. He didn't feel sorry for her one bit, but he noticed something in particular that dropped his mood completely. Eek. Ochako-chan, be careful. Each time the young bushy-haired girl touched something with her dirty fingers, the object in question began to float in the air before it started shooting out like stray bullets. That little bitch. Katsuki frowned and stomped towards the girl, smoke forming in both of his palms. Izuku was following him from closely behind to make sure he didn't do anything bad. Do you know how expensive those were? The blonde raged, jumping at the poor girl before his boyfriend could do anything to stop him. But before Katsuki could do anything to her, he found her button-tipped fingers touching him in the face and he became weightless. Floating in the air. What the fuck? He spun around in mid-air, not moving anywhere. He felt like a mentally retarded astronaut. You round-face bitch, let me down. He tried to reach for Ochako's neck to choke her, but his body refused to move and she dodged with an eep. I'm so sorry, Katsuki-san. Ochako cried with drooling lips. I can't control my quirk. All of a sudden, Katsuki felt his body go from absolute weightlessness to feeling like 20 tons of bricks as he collapsed to the floor, leaving a huge hole that greatly resembled the young man. Kachan. Ochako-chan. Izuku cried out in surprise and worry. I'm gonna choke the bitch and send her to an early grave. Katsuki roared, somehow pulling himself out of the hole. He still felt extremely heavy and pressurized, but at least he had control over his body this time. Izuku tackled Katsuki to the floor while Ochako's friends tackled her to the floor to stop her from touching anything else. It wasn't until some time later that they got everything under control. But by then, Izuku and Katsuki's home floor was such a mess that it was a surprise that it hadn't fallen to the ground. Katsuki glared at the apologetic girl who was sitting across from him. He growled at her before placing the ice pack over his head while Izuku was dabbing his wounds with rubbing alcohol and cotton swabs. Deku, do you still have the number for Kamui Wood and Smintos Bros? Call them and tell them to get their fucking asses over pronto. Katsuki watched as his boyfriend disappeared into another room and he laid back with his head over the couch. What a fucking Saturday. It started out pretty good and now it was all just fucked up. Fuck my life. He looked back up to CT. He girls looking at him and he growled at them. What do you think you're looking at? It was silent for a few good moments until Suyu opened her mouth. You got beat up by a 15-year-old girl. Izuku had to restrain Katsuki from trying to murder the three girls again. Thank you so much, Smintos-san. Izuku said excitedly, bowing repeatedly towards the blocky-shaped cement man, wearing a samurai ponytail hairstyle. The tall man in question was wiping his hands clean with a towel. He shook his head at Izuku's gratefulness, chuckling. No problem, Midoriya-kun. The man cheerfully said. A huge grin was plastered on his lips. I'm always happy to help you guys. You're like family, he added. Same here, a man who looked like a ninja made entirely of wood, said, giving a thumbs up at the young man. He went back to his work, pressing his hands on the floor and regenerating the wooden flooring. Any friend of All Might is a friend to me as well. I feel bad for making you two come in such short notice. Izuku said wearily, rubbing the back of his neck. And on a Saturday too. Fuck them, it's their job. It's not our fault that their company is open 7 days a week. Katsuki complained with crossed arms from where he was sitting. Kachan. Izuku chastised Katsuki, but the two older men just chuckled at them. It's all right, Midoriya-kun. We know Bakugo-kun means well, even though he has trouble with it. Smintos patted Izuku on the shoulders and the younger man looked away shyly, blushing at the childish treatment. Fuck you all, old men. Katsuki grinned viciously and gave them both middle fingers. Though, even a saint would lose their patience with Bakugo. Kamui would side with a sweat drop. Kachan wasn't always like this. Izuku said somberly, looking down. A cement hand lightly touched his chin and forcing his gaze upwards. We know, Midoriya-kun. We know, Smintos said with a soft smile. The two of them shared a knowing look with one another, but the Katsuki came up and separated them. Old man, are you trying to steal my boy away from me? He hissed. Kamui Wood and Smintos just laughed at him as they finished cleaning up. Wait, Izuku Kaie. D out to them when they put everything away and was about to leave. What about the bill? The two men looked at each other before looking at the younger man, laughing. It's all right. You don't owe us anything. They laughed. But I'll feel bad. It's like we're taking advantage of you. Izuku whined, looking crestfallen. His cheeks were puffed out like a pouting toddler with big watery green eyes. The two of them stood there stunned. He was adorable. How about this? Smintos started, walking up to him. He placed a cement hand over Izuku's shoulders and smiled. Just think of this as us returning a favor. Next time you need our help, you can return the favor by giving us some of Bakugo-kun's cakes for free. Free? Hell no, Katsuki said from the background. When they went downstairs to bid the two men goodbye, Ochako and company were sitting at a nearby table looking sullen. When they saw Kamui and Smintos leave, the girls rushed up to him and Izuku. Che. Katsuki clicked his tongue. He had nearly forgotten about those rats. We're so sorry. The three girls screeched over and over. We'll do anything. Please don't hate us. Izuku was being ever the fucking nerd and tried to calm them down, which only made them more hysterical as they ignored any excuse. Izuku used. They wouldn't relent in their apology and it was giving Katsuki a headache. Hey, bitches, Katsuki. I opened his mouth and was about to tell the girls to fuck off and that it wasn't that big of a deal since Kamui and Smintos refused to take their money. Fucking Deku and people fucking falling heads over heels for him. But then an idea came to mind to kill two birds with one stone. That cost a fucking arm and a leg. Kachan, what are you? He raised a finger over Izuku's lips. So because of you three, we're in fucking debt. And we just opened the shop. You think it's easy being a store owner? Katsuki started yelling, making the three high school girls flinch. So, if you three are really sorry. He started with an evil grin. You better start working for us to repay for all of the damages. Before they could get any words in, he added, without pay. Hey, that's no fair. Mina complained. Yeah, that's basically slavery. What? It's a free country. If you don't like it, then you just don't show your ugly mugs here ever again. Katsuki laughed. It was a win-win situation. Either they got free labor or the girls would be out of his hair and stop bothering him. Okay. All three of them finally agreed after some time. Good. Katsuki smirked before disappearing somewhere. Izuku looked between the exchange. At a loss for words. He looked at the poor girls who looked like lost puppies and sighed. Don't worry, we'll pay you. Only minimum wage, at the moment. Though, he smiled weakly at them. He left after Katsuki and left the girls alone. Well, on the bright side, at least we can hang out with Midoriya-kun some more. Izuku moaned gently in his sleep, tossing and turning slightly from under the covers of the bed. Green hair clung tightly to his sweaty forehead. It was early in the morning but the sun had barely broken into the sky. Its light RDLY breaking through the holes of the blinds over the window. The room still entirely dark besides the few streaks that hovered above the young Midoriya's head. Izuku's eyes began to slowl. Wide open and he blinked at his new surroundings. Then his eyes shot open. Shigaraki. The mission. He looked around in fright and saw that it was a little later than it should have been. The other person was already out of bed, even. His chest began to beat loudly. He didn't even try to question his surroundings, which for some reason felt warm and too familiar. Something he couldn't recall before, but he shook the thoughts away. He had to finish what he came for. Turning over the bed, he began searching in the nearby drawers, struggling a bit to find his case with the .45 automag in it. Where was it? It should have been in there. Growing nervous, he started to search more furiously now, not even trying to be silent. He was starting to panic as the seconds passed. The door made a click and he abruptly stood up. Standing there naked and unarmed, he watched with wide eyes as the handle of the door slowly began to turn and a frown found its way onto his lips. Deciding to forget the gun, he looked around for something else and spied the bathroom closet. Darting inside, he looked into the mirror, before swiftly smashing his fist into it. His disheveled appearance threw the mirror cracking into a million pieces. In a booming crash, blood splattered everywhere and the noise alerted the other person as they came rushing in. But before they could do anything, he picked up the just shard in his bloody hand and jumped at his target without a moment's hesitation, pushing the both of them to the ground. There was another crash as the other man's belongings flew out of his hand and fell scattered to the floor. Izuku strangled the blonde man by his neck and stabbed the mirror shard into his eye but stopped midway when light green met with orange. His memories quickly returning to him. KK Kachan. Izuku stuttered as he asked in shock and horror, more to himself than to the older man beneath him. He shook his head furiously, sitting upright, throwing the shard out of his grip. He started apologizing over and over again, slowly falling back onto him, grasping him by the neck of his shirt and half-hugging him. Hot tears were running down his eyes and soaking into Katsuki's shirt. It happened again. It happened again. Katsuki said nothing, his intense glare only softening as he watched his lover's naked form hold onto him for dear life. He brought a hand over the man's curly hair and ran his fingers through them. He eyed the two pieces of paper in his other hand before shoving them into his pants pocket. I was going to surprise you with breakfast in bed, Katsuki said, giving a light chuckle that was almost sweet and very unbecoming of the usually angry man. He eyed the platter of rice and katsudon spilled over the floor, closing his eyes, sighing. I'm so sorry. I did it again, Izuku cried, clenching his eyes shut. Shish, it's all right, you've been getting better, Katsuki said, still running his fingers through Izuku's green locks and using his other hand to massage his back. Your attacks have been decreasing, the ash blonde said lovingly. But I could have hurt you. Izuku continued to cry. He raised his head to look at Katsuki in the eyes. What if I reacted too slow? It's fine, Katsuki replied. I can handle it. But just shut up, Katsuki said with a warm gentle smile, neither sarcastic or cheeky like he would usually make. It was just a warm heartfelt smile. It seemed to calm Izuku down a bit but there were still some worry in the back of his mind. Then, Katsuki held him by the sides of his face and lightly kissed him on the nose and all worries vanished in that one moment. Light red started to slowly appear over the freckles of his cheeks before his entire face became a hot beet red. Izuku just stared down at his lover and everything became quiet, lasting for almost a minute. Neither said anything for a while. Izuku too embarrassed to say a word. And Katsuki, simply just enjoying everything for tea. He moaned until he finally broke the silence. You destroyed breakfast so I guess we'll eat out, he later adds with a lecherous smirk, even though you should probably get dressed first, I don't mind you in your birthday suit. A hand slaps Izuku on the butt and he arches his back, making a purring to Katsuki's amusement sound, blushing intensified from the touch. Kachan. Izuku looked around the restaurant nervously, ducking his head between his shoulders. This isn't right. He didn't want to be here. Katsuki briefly lowered the menu in his hand to give him a look. What's wrong, Deku? He asks, slightly disinterested in his lover's panicky state. Though, inwardly he was soaking in the view, pleasurably savoring the sight. A nervously wrecked Deku was delicious. We really travel halfway across Tokyo just to come to this restaurant? Izuku asked, meekly. He gives a weary glance at the menu in his hands. The prices were off the charts for the simplest of meals. The breaded pork rice noodles that he had intended on ordering was 4,800 yen for a single bowl. When he looked up to see Katsuki staring back at him, he looked away and didn't say anything further. Why is he spending so much money on me? Especially just for breakfast. And so far away, too. Katsuki said aloud in a bored manner, holding his chin up by a hand with his elbow propped up on the table. Because I fucking want to. Okay. Also because the farther they were the less likely anyone they knew would interrupt them like the previous day. He hissed a cloud of smoke from the corner. of his mouth as he remembered that annoying Ochako girl and her duo idiot friends. The waitress, a friendly little thing, came up to them soon after to take their orders. Katsuki ended up ordering their meals for the two of them, getting himself a large bowl of 5-spiced Phoenix ramen with extra chili and habaneros peppers, getting Izuku the breaded pork rice noodles and both of them a glass of lemon soda. He initially wanted some sake, but the restaurant, like most, really didn't serve alcohol until sometime after noon. When the girl had returned with their orders some time later, the two of them had begun to eat in relative silence, with Katsuki chowing down on his noodles like there was no tomorrow. As if it was his last meal. It made Izuku quirk an eyebrow at him before he went back to his own bowl, taking his time to eat. Mostly just poking his chopsticks around the white noodles, stirring them. Katsuki was just being too nice to him. It was too much sometimes. He didn't deserve to be treated like this. Especially what happened 15 years ago. It was still something that has been on his mind even after all of the years he had spent recuperating with Katsuki. The incident yearly. With the mirror shiv proved that his life in the VA Yakuza was still scarred in the back of his mind. Was there any hope of him ever returning to a normal life? Had he ever had a normal life before? The question scared him because he knew the answer. Once Katsuki was finished eating, he looked up to see Izuku staring out blankly, lost in his thoughts. His bowl of rice noodles and his favorite breaded pork left mostly untouched. The ashy blonde was about to open his mouth to say something, but the waitress from before interrupted them. "Is everything fine?" she asked in a chipper tone. Katsuki could tell that she was eyeing his partner through the corners of her eyes. Her eyes were predatory like every other asshole and bitch out there. "We're fine," Katsuki growled from under his breath, flames bellowing from deep under his throat as he glared at her, sending shivers down her spine. The poor girl backed away nervously at the sudden aura surrounding the Bakugo man. I'm sorry for interrupting. Oh, just let me know if you need anything else," she said in a hurry before scurrying off like the insect she was. Bakugo-kun, that was mean. Izuku was broken out of his thought. And looked at Katsuki with an admonishing glare. "Bitch was pissing me off," the blonde replied easily, crossing his arms and leaning back into his seat. Izuku seemed to perk slightly at the words before slouching his shoulders, giving his lover a sideways glance. He really had a bad personality, even though he meant well, at least most of the time. If it weren't for Izuku, then he would probably already have a sweet wife and a child or two. A normal, happy family. Normal. It wasn't hard to imagine. Katsuki Bakugo was a really handsome man. While he was not extremely tall, he was still taller than most men, making the already short Izuku look even smaller by comparison. His skin was a nice porcelain color tinted by a copper tan from working under the heat so much. And the skin tone was M8 only more obvious as Izuku saw a single strand of sweat dripping down Katsuki's neck that made his breath hitch. Katsuki's ashen white hair was free, unlike when he usually covered it completely during work, allowing it to stick out all over, creating a sort of dirty yet slick look. The blonde was one of those rare individuals who hardly washed their hair properly but still somehow managed to have hair like an Adonis sex god. It was that sexy bed hair or something. Izuku found himself blushing and he shook his head back and forth to get his dirty thoughts out of the gutter. Katsuki really was a handsome man. He could do so much more better than him. Yet for 15 years Katsuki's been through so much in 15 short years just because of him. When an image of Kachan during his early teen years filled his head, Izuku blushed even harder. Many mixed emotions ran through him about what had occurred back then. He hated it, loved it, despised it, cherished it, was horrified by it. All of the emotions just exploded and all that was left was a depressing feeling of self-hate. "I'm such a dirty slut," he thought horribly to himself. It was the day he betrayed Katsuki, corrupted him and was also able to confess his disgusting unnatural feelings for him. He looked back at Katsuki and sighed inwardly. If none of that had happened, if Katsuki had never became his friend, maybe, just maybe, the blonde would have had a normal life. A normal family. Instead of being dragged down by him and his not normal situation. "Okay, we're done," Katsuki finally spoke up, causing Izuku to jump up when he realized he was staring at Katsuki more intensely than he had thought. And the other man more than knew that. We're done? Izuku asked fearfully, both happy and sad that maybe Katsuki was finally fed up with him and was finally going to move on. Yeah, you don't seem to be very hungry and I'm done eating, so let's go on our date. The ashy blonde said nonchalantly with a shrug of his shoulders. Date. This is a date. Izuku blushed for the umpteenth time in that restaurant. He had thought this was just a spur of the moment eating out. What, you thought this shithole was our date? Katsuki laughed, baring his fangs sinisterly. He pulled out 2 tickets from his pockets and waved it in front of the small man across from him. We're going to the aquarium, Izuku screamed out loud, jumping up and down. His pupils dilated and he looked like a kid being given candy for the first time. Katsuki was standing behind him, arms crossed, and head held high. Mentally patting himself on the back just as the young green-haired man ran up to him and hugged him. Around him, the passerby were beginning to stare and he couldn't help but blush, weakly shooting L of them a glare when they made eye contact. He looked down to see large sea green eyes staring up at him with a pleading look and pushed back the desire to pet Izuku on the head. There were plenty of time to cuddle since they had the whole day to themselves. Come on, he started, let's go inside. The moment they stepped inside the building, Izuku had run to the first thing he spotted, drawing Katsuki in tow by the hand. It was a large glass display showcasing various sea critters but more particularly the manatee, also known as the sea cow. Izuku let go of him and ran up against the glass to press his face on it. Alongside all of the tiny children, staring at one of the creatures who quickly took notice of him. The creature floated gently down to look at him, making a motion with its mouth as if to roar but they couldn't hear it from their side. It was holding a ball of cabbage in its flubbery fin arms to its chest and was taking bites of it, occasionally looking at Izuku and the children. Bubbles streamed from its flabby lips and the children and Izuku cheered. That's so cool, isn't it, Ni-chan? A young boy said, looking up at Izuku with sparkling eyes. I know, right, the young man replied back, his eyes matching the boy's. That's so adorable bringing your little brother to the aquarium, a middle-aged woman said from beside Katsuki. He mostly grunted and gave a brief glare of acknowledgement before staring back at Izuku. The manatee finally stopped eating, throwing the leftover cabbage away before it swam back and forth in front of the glass. Watching the kids and Izuku with interest. He didn't know why some people just liked to stare at stupid animals. What was so fun about that? But at least it made Izuku happy. Hey, Kachan, doesn't it remind you of All Might? Izuku called out to Katsuki cheerfully, turning around and pointing a finger at the glass behind him. Orange eyes trailed up the finger, falling over the manatee, taking note of its flabby skin. He raises a brow when he notices that its eyes were almost completely covered by the flab, giving off a hollow eyeless look with its tiny pupils barely showing through. There were even a couple of flabby skin that trailed down the sides of its face, like long bangs. It really did look like the old bastard. Katsuki frowned at the thought. He gave it a cold stare, gasping a bit when he thought he saw it mouth, Detroit Smash, while pumping one of its flippers over its head in triumph. In the background, all of the kids mimicked the expression, each one cheering loudly as they did so. The strange image made him slap himself in the face. He growled before rushing towards Izuku, grabbing the younger boy by the arm while he was in the midst of cheering with the kids. I wasn't done watching, Izuku whined, waving goodbye to some of the children as they were calling out to him. Bye, Oni-chan, they yelled. If we keep staring at that fugly sea cow, we'll end up wasting the entire day. Katsuki reasoned, although, deep down he knew it was mostly because of Izuku's hero. All Might, that bastard. Even now he's still trying to take Deku away from me. After dragging Izuku for a bit, they had ended up at one of those open animal petting places. It was a smaller one where some kids were learning about crabs and other crustaceans at a miniature artificial beach. Izuku let go of his hands and rushed over towards the petting zoo with stars in his eyes. While there, something had caught his attention and he turned around to wave at Katsuki. Hey, Kachan, look at this. He beckoned before picking it up. When Katsuki came over, Izuku held out a tiny hermit crab towards him in his hands. The look in his eyes just screamed happiness. Like he had found the most precious gem in the world. It looks just like you. Izuku commented, making Katsuki almost trip over himself. First the manatee and now a cute adorable Kachan crab. He glared at the crab offended, only to find out that the crab was doing the same. Both of them were staring each other down. He could almost read the crab's mind, as if it was jealous that it was being compared to him, as if he was the lowly thing. He bared his fangs at the crustacean and, shockingly, it returned the favor with tiny raised claws snapping in the air, threatening to cut him. Izuku laughed as he was watching it all with earth in his eyes, but quickly stopped when he noticed someone coming up from behind the angry blonde. The person laid their hand gently over Katsuki's shoulder and he forced himself to break away from He Crab's annoying stare, only to find a young man a few inches shorter than him with a crow's head. Tokiyami. Katsuki scoffed. What the fuck are you doing here? Nice to meet you, too, Bakugo-kun. The Birdman said, shrugging off the angry glare that was sent his way. He gestured behind him to reveal a dozen tiny rugrats, wearing their school uniforms. These are my students. Kids, say hello to Bakugo-san and Midoriya-san. Kavichiwa tilde Baku-sam, Midawi-sam. The kids said in a chorus. Please don't say any foul languages around the kids, Tokiyami added, giving a negative nod towards Katsuki, whose face flushed in anger at his action. Ah, they your F-vens, Toko-sensui. A trio of kids ran up to the Birdman and pulled at his pants. One of the boys ducked his safety hat over his eyes when he caught Izuku looking his way, blushing. Why, yes, Tokiyami smiled gingerly, squatting down to meet his children's gaze. They're very important Anikis of mine, he said with lidded eyes. PFF'd, you're one to talk. Trying to coerce them into the Yakuza. Katsuki crossed his arms and turned his head. Well, as long as they join our gang, it shouldn't be any trouble. Tokiyami replied seriously. Although, as a teacher, I would rather they refrain from any unsavory activities. I agree, Katsuki mumbled as he eyed Izuku being jumped by the three, almost falling to the ground. Soon after, the other kids started to hound the green-haired man, and one even bothered Katsuki, only shaking from his glare but not letting go of his hand. Sweet kids, he mumbled. It almost reminds me of our time in the Yakuza. Tokiyami sighed, almost longingly. Don't even think about recruiting Izuku back into that hellhole. Katsuki yelled quietly, shooting him a look. You guys may have decided to keep doing that trash in the slums of the streets, but you better keep him out of it. Tokiyami looked at Katsuki with widened eyes, slightly alarmed. He raised his hands up in surrender, shaking his head. I have no intentions of doing such things, the crow said. Neither do the others, he added. It's just, Midoriya-kun has never explicitly stated that he had quit, has he? I feel that he still feels like he has an obligation to All Might-sama and is confused about whether he wants to lead the gang or not. Katsuki said nothing, he just bared his fangs at Tokiyami. I am not here to start a fight, I too believe that Midoriya-kun is better off with you. We all want him to be happier, especially me. His sweat dropped when he saw the look Katsuki was giving him, his jealousy really knew no bounds. He forcibly continued. He's been through a lot. Even All Might-sama would understand and support his decision if he were still here. Katsuki shook his head. He glanced over from where he stood, watching Izuku get overwhelmed by the children, easily camouflaging amongst them. Tears of joy falling from his eyes. You better, Katsuki finally said once his rage subsided. I don't want him to deal with that crap anymore. What about how his parents? Tokiyami stopped to bite his tongue, but it was too late. If looks could kill and some quirks could do just that, he was already dead yesterday. What about his parents? Katsuki growled, the air around him turning dark and a shadow falling over his eyes. The two of them said nothing else to each other. Look, Oni-chan, one of the boys said while tugging at the sleeves of Izuku's shirt, pointing at something to his left. Two girls were on his other side, tugging at his sleeves trying to pull him into the gift shop in the other direction. And a few more kids were hugging his legs, wanting him to stay or go somewhere else. The kids had quickly grown accustomed to the young Midoriya and even started referring to him as Big Brother. Pulling him everywhere they went. All of them trying to wrestle him out of the others' attentions. It quickly grew into a game of sorts of tug-of-war, with Izuku in the middle. He tried to calm the children down but to no avail. He felt someone watching and looked up to see Katsuki glaring at him from across the hall. He mouthed a silent, "Sorry," and nodded at the kids below him. He chuckled when the older boy rolled his eyes and shook his head as he was dragged away. "Rambunctious bunch, aren't they?" Tokiyami laughed from beside him, elbowing him playfully. "Yeah," Katsuki growled under his breath. "They were more like cockblockers. Ever thought of having kids?" "Wah, what? Midoriya-kun seems to adore kids, I think he wants to have children. But he can't get pregnant." There was a long pause between the two of them. Both had wide eyes, each for their own reason. But Tokiyami was the one to break the long silence when he had begun choking on his own spit. And after a few uncomfortable fits, he burst out laughing. Pregnant. He was uncontrollably laughing at the idea. A look very unbecoming of the usually cool crow-headed man now filled his lips. He bent over with one arm under his chest, using the other to support himself over his knee in an effort to slow down the ripples channeling through his chest, but to no avail. It continued for a few more minutes that seemed to go on endlessly, and Katsuki wasn't the least bit amused. Embarrassment filled his eyes and he had a small scorn on his lips. "Are you serious?" Tokiyami asked, wiping a tear from his eye. He sighed as he shook his head, finally letting the last bit of giggles leave his body. "That's not what I meant. I meant, have you two ever thought of adoption or something similar?" "Something like that," he muttered, turning away. "That's great that you're thinking about it." Tokiyami's eyes began to light up. Yeah, Katsuki said, rolling his eyes at the other. "It looks like you love kids, too," he countered. "Why don't you marry them?" Then, Tokiyami laughs to himself, shrugging off the offensive innuendo and says, "Being a substitute teacher does has its perks." A somber look breaks over his lips. "It's like having the family I don't have," he said, but then Katsuki punches him in the shoulders. "You asshole, you already have a family," the ashen blonde growled, shaking his fist. Tokiyami freezes. His mouth hung open for a bit and he stares at the older man questioningly. When he realized what the other man had implied, he smacked himself in the forehead. "You're right, how could I forget?" He chuckles, looking back at the kids. "One for all is as much my family as these kids are." It was no wonder Izuku loved the rough man so dearly. Speaking of, sweet cries of children's laughter catches the two's attention and they look over to see the little tykes wrestle the larger Izuku to the ground, dog-piling him as they screamed. A twinkle fills Tokiyami's eyes and he smiled. "But there's nothing wrong in wanting to let your family grow bigger and bigger." Katsuki just rolled his eyes at the comment before raising a hand over his mouth. "You're gonna make me hurl," he said in faint nausea. "I'm glad to see life with Izuku-ni hasn't lessened your sense of humor," Tokiyami chuckles. "As long as you don't bring Deku into your family matters. I don't care what you do with your life," Katsuki said. Moments later, the kids came rushing back towards the two of them, dragging Izuku in tow. They were all hopping up and down in an excited fury. Katsuki raised a brow at the young green-haired man who was as equally jumpy. Sensei! Sensei! The children roared in a chorus. "We wanna go to Ta Shro." "Yeah, Kachan. They're having a show outside soon. We should totally go see it. There's going to be dolphins and sea lions and killer whales and sea otters and..." He rushed up to Katsuki, running his mouth a mile a minute. Big puppy dog eyes were staring up at the blonde. Pathetically, Katsuki replies with a shrug of his shoulders. He was planning on taking Izuku to the show later anyway. With the kids. "Yush, we wanna sib with Onwi Chom." What? Yay. The loud squeaky voices of the children around him caused Katsuki to shove his palms over his ears. "Yay," he mutters unenthusiastically from beside Izuku, who elbowed him playfully in return. "Kachan. Don't let them get to you, they're just kids. They're cockblockers is what they are." Katsuki growls silently, shoving his face into his shoulders. "What did you say?" Izuku asked curiously, but the other man just mumbled back, refusing to clarify. He smiled tenderly at Katsuki before turning to face Tokiyami to his left. "So, Tokiyami, I didn't know you were a teacher. It was such a surprise. Really, meeting you here and all." No, not at all," the Birdman said humbly. "I am just a mere volunteer worker, a substitute teacher, really. These kids really seem close to you. How long have you been teaching them?" A few months now. Their current teacher is on maternity leave, he explained. At first they were just hiring subs for a few weeks each, but they liked me for some reason, so they gave me an extension. A small red blush appeared on his cheeks as he piteously scratched his feathered chin with his index finger. He looked anxiously away from Izuku. Wow. It sounds like you might actually become a full-time teacher, Tokiyami. Izuku laughed, patting his friend on his shoulder. You could totally do it, man. More like do it into the grave. Katsuki grumbled, crossing his arms. He looked around at all of the kids scattered in the seats. How the heck do you even pay attention to all of them? You're letting them run more wild than free-roaming chickens at a farm for the slaughter. The blonde stuck a thumb out, gesturing towards the kids around them. Surprisingly, my quirk works pretty well with the kids. Shadow is always watching them. Tokiyami replied, pointing up at a shadowy version of himself that was flying back and forth, from one kid to the other. Shadow flew down in front of them just as he said it, giving a salute and, all clear, boss, before returning back to his duties. Sounds like some kind of child stalker. What's a stalker? One of the little girls next to him turned and asked. She was holding a large lollipop in her small hands. I'ma go buy something, Katsuki said, getting up. You guys need anything? Or the brats? He asked. No, we're good, Tokiyami said. The kids had already eaten, no need to worry about them. Izuku was about to say, no, thanks, but then an idea popped into his head as his mouth hung open for a moment. Hey, Kachan, can I get that one chili dog I like? You know, the one. The green-haired man asked, almost innocently, but there was a nervous grin on his lips. A small pink tint was covering his lightly tanned freckled cheeks. What one? Katsuki paused, confused as he turned to look at him. He hadn't known that Izuku had liked hot dogs, let alone had a favorite flavor. You know, the one. Izuku replied, looking around rapidly, his gaze refusing to look Katsuki's way. The one with the relish? Katsuki asked, slightly getting annoyed as he approached the younger man. Just say it. He couldn't read Deku's mind. No, Izuku said, now growing redder. He couldn't believe he was doing this. Why was he still going with it? He was never the type to initiate. He leaned towards Katsuki and waved him over to come closer. You know, the one, he whispered. He said it so quietly that it was hard for the blonde to hear him, despite now standing right in front of him. Katsuki growled before leaning down. Okay, what is it? He asked, turning his ear in Izuku's direction. It was almost as if he was too afraid to say the words or something. It wasn't like he was asking him to buy a dildo or something. That Deku always made everything difficult sometimes. Why did he always have to dance around subjects like an antsy girl? But whatever. Then, Izuku jumped up, quickly placing a light peck on the taller man's cheeks before shrinking back into his seat. He was staring into his lap, refusing to look back up at the other. A huge blush spreading across from up his neck and all the way to his ears. Well, that was embarrassing, Tokiyami replied, offhandedly. He moved his hand over his eyes as if to cover a non-existent hat over them. Shut up, Katsuki said, then he bluntly turned to look back at Izuku in all seriousness. So what did you want? Izuku looked at Katsuki with a blank stare and a small frown. Just go, Bakugo, he said. Geez, what's up with him? Katsuki thought with a scoff before he left. Use mush ria way love yours dotty, huh, Oni-chan. He heard a few of the kids around them ask as he left. I guess, was the gloomy reply from Izuku. I should get him something to cheer him up. What did I even do wrong? Katsuki growled, scratching the back of his head furiously. What would you like? A cheery girl's voice asked. Katsuki Bakugo stared out past the cash register with an unamused gaze. His mouth was hanging open slightly. The fuck? He muttered under his breath. This was bad service. Where the hell was the server? Your order, sir, the same voice asked, sounding slightly confused. Well, she shouldn't be the one confused. Katsuki was looking around for the damn girl, but there was nothing in sight except for a random uniform just hanging there, drying from behind the cash register. Who the fuck hangs their clothes out to dry at their workplace? Sir, the girl asked again, and he slammed his fist on the counter. Where the fuck's your manager? I am not amused with this little prank. Show yourself. He yelled out and he could have sworn he saw the clothes jump back a bit as if they were alive. Sir, I'm right in front of you. The girl said. The fuck? Katsuki found himself saying for the millionth time. I'm so sorry, my quirk is invisibility, the girl explained. The left shoulder of the uniform rose up as if the person was trying to wave at him. He raised a brow suspiciously at the girl. Okay, well I want. Quote. 5 minutes later, he received his platter of American-style hamburger and fries. Here you go, sir, thanks for waiting. He quickly went over to the napkin dispenser, wanting to get the sauces and everything else and leave as soon as possible. He still needed to get something for Izuku lest he ends up on the couch tonight. Then, Aniki, the young man early dropped his food from the annoying screaming from behind him. The very familiar and annoying screaming. He decided that this wasn't the time nor the place, and he was in an especially bad mood with everything that's been happening. He didn't need to add more to his mental plate. He looked on ahead, refusing to turn around, but before he could take a step, the voice stopped him. Is that you, Aniki? Oh my god. It really is you. A spiky redhead appeared behind him, placing a hand over his shoulder. Oh, hey, Bakugo-sama. What brings you here? Another familiar person appeared beside Eijiro. He stopped to glare at his friend. Dude, you know he doesn't like being called Aniki. The hell he doesn't. We're bros. Eijiro frowned and bumped his forehead into Denki's. You ass, you're going to get on his nerves. Well, what are you going to do about it then, Buzz Freak? Rock for brains. Vibrator charger. Boulder dick. Several ticks appeared on Katsuki's face as his patience was wearing thin. He tried to drown out the fighting behind him. The entrance to the show was only a few feet away. Bastard. Just a few more seconds. He's almost there. You jerk. Then, there was a loud smack of a fist ramming into someone's cheek from behind him. It quickly turned into a dust cloud of yelling, kicking, and screaming. Fuck me. He sighed before turning around, not wanting to deal with this. The fuck do you guys want? He had to physically force himself from yelling the words at the top of his lungs. The two had frozen mid-fight with both holding each other's hair in AF. East and tugging at each other's shirt with their other fist. He mentally cursed himself as everyone around them had stopped to stare. Katsuki sent them all death glares and sent most of the passerby running off in terror. Eijiro was the first one to get up, patting dust off of his suit's pants with Denki joining soon after. I didn't know you were here, Aniki. He said, quickly forgetting the few moments earlier. He smiled from ear to ear with his fangs showing from under his lips. There were bruises and bite marks all over his face and neck, yet he didn't seem the least perturbed. Denki glare. D at the redhead from behind with crossed arms, rolling his eyes at the obvious display of affection. Eijiro continued, are you here, alone? No, that's impossible. Midoriya Aniki is here, too, right? The rocky skin quirk man asked but then quickly answered his own question. Another angry tick appeared on Katsuki's face. Yeah, I'm here with the Deku, what does it matter? He said. Oh, nothing. I just figured you wouldn't go anywhere, especially a fun place like this, unless Midoriya Aniki had dragged you here. Eijiro said nonchalantly, rubbing the back of his spiky head with a hand. Cats. Uki's eyes twitched at the offhand insult. Even if Eijiro hadn't meant to make such an offending remark, he was that special type of stupid that made it difficult to forgive. Denki, being the slightly smarter of the two, came up beside his friend and gave him an elbow to the chest. You ass, are you trying to make Bakugo-sama angry? You're making him sound like he's Midoriya Aniki's bitch. Another angry tick appeared on him. His fingers were twitching and he was trying to push down the urge to, accidentally, drop the food in his hand and, accidentally, pummel these two assholes into a pitiful hole. But he wasn't going to waste food just to kill these guys. They weren't worth it. Of course I'm not trying to say that. Eijiro laughed brashly, smacking his electric quirk friend in the back of his shoulders. Bakugo Aniki is too manly for that, right? He looked at Katsuki and grunted at him for confirmation. There's no way you'd be the bottom. Midoriya Aniki is definitely uke material. Only someone feminine and sweet like Midoriya Aniki would take it. Did he just call Izuku a bottom bitch? Katsuki felt another tick in the back of his head and he felt like his face was riddled. Ed with nothing but pulsating nerves now. His veins popping visibly on both of his wrists and around his neck. FYI, Deku has a huge cock. Katsuki surprised himself as he stated loudly but in an abnormally calm tone. He fumed slightly in pride, wanting to defend Izuku's masculinity. Okay. The two of the thug-looking men said awkwardly, turning to look at each other. Each shooting each other an uncomfortable stare. Well, anyway. Are you watching the aquatic animal show, too? Eijiro asked, quickly changing the subject. I heard the whale shampoo is white and can sparkle. Denki added. No, his name's Soap. And he doesn't sparkle, he shoots rainbows from out of his blowhole, Eijiro growled and elbowed the blonde. No, his name's Shampoo. And you shoot crap out of your blowhole. Exclamation mark quote. Both of them began to growl at the other, baring their teeth and shoving each other back and forth. Denki's whole body started to spark with electricity, causing his clothing to frizz and cling to his skin, his hair rising. While Eijiru's entire body was literally becoming rock hard along with his hair and fangs. They were staring each other down, leaning forward with their hands raised, getting ready to pounce. Katsuki decided that he had enough of these two idiots and carefully balanced his tray on his left hand before punching the both of them with one swift charged blow from his right. Both young men were sent flying, crashing into a nearby wall, before sliding down into a full trash can, knocking all of its contents out all over them as they laid there in an unconscious daze. Assholes, he growled before going back up the stadium entrance. Hey, Katsuki. When the blonde got back to his seat he felt multiple ticks rise up on his body. His brow was quivering as he threatened to scream bloody murder at everyone around him, screw if the kids heard him. It wasn't like they would be kids forever anyway. So fuck them, too. Hell, oh, Mineta. He gritted through his teeth and forced down the urge to pick up his tray over the midget's sticky ball head and slam it down repeatedly until there was nothing but a purple bloodstain left. Why is he in my seat? Just then, the CR. Out around them, before there was a big splash and all of them got wet. Now my food's wet, too. God damn it. Ouch. That sucks, Mineta said, wincing. Oh well, he says before BBing a handful of Katsuki's fries and shoved them into his mouth. Thief worf thrill thry af weef. He mumbled with a full mouth. Katsuki's pupils turned to skulls which proceeded to explode into nukes. His entire body was consumed by flames. Truly, it was a sight to behold and anyone would cower under his rage. Or at least anyone normal. And Mineta was not by any means what one would consider normal. Cool. Your quirk is so nifty and versatile, like always, Mineta commented before grabbing the now dry burger. Taking huge mouthfuls, he was chewing loudly, while messily licking at his fingers. Crumbs from the hamburger were shooting from out of his mouth and flying everywhere, a few of them hitting Katsuki in the face. Watching the tiny man eat, Katsuki quickly lost his appetite and shoved the rest of the food into Mineta's lap. Fuck this shitty string of bad luck. He turned to see Izuku mouthed an, I'm sorry, to him and Katsuki shook his head. It wasn't worth the trouble anymore. He just gave his lover a disappointed sigh. It wasn't like it was Izuku's fault. As if the idiot duo weren't enough of a headache. If the grape midget and the two dumb fucks were here, the rest of them were probably not too far away. Either, unfortunately. Why was killing people you didn't like considered murder anyway? Who the fuck came up with that rule? The world would be a better place if he could just kill everyone. He just wanted to spend some alone time with his boyfriend. Is that so much to ask for? Here, Kachan, you can take my seat. Izuku interrupted his thoughts, already halfway of getting out of his seat. He patted the spot lightly from where he hovered. I'll just sit over there. Izuku nodded over at an empty seat near the kids who seemed to have been watching the events unfold. Stars had filled their eyes when they heard the words leave Izuku's mouth. He sneered at the idea of Izuku being stolen from him by mere children just because of that stupid grape bastard, but then an idea hit him. He could make something good out of all these strings of bad luck. As the green-haired boy was brushing past him, he quickly grabbed Izuku by the arm and pulled him down. Ma! King his butt fall right into Katsuki's lap just as he sat down. A shrill gasp left Izuku's throat as he realized what had just happened. His mouth was a quivering thin line as Izuku sat there frozen, shrinking with every second. His freckled face quickly flushing red when his brain caught up with the rest of his body and steam shot out of his ears. Kachan. He moaned in mild complaint. You're wet, Katsuki frowned, ignoring his comment. The sticky sensation of wet clothes and wet skin was usually a turn-on for him, but right now it was more uncomfortable than anything else. He leaned over Izuku's shoulders and gave him a short nibble with his fangs in the nook of his shoulders. Izuku's face somehow managed to turn even redder and he ducked his eyes under his curly hair. His body getting hotter from the embarrassment he was feeling. It took him a moment to realize that he wasn't just heating up on the inside but also on the outside from the subtle hiss of the water evaporating on his skin. He looked back with a flushed face to see Katsuki's sharp eyes staring back into him, a small smirk hidden under his lips. There, the blonde said from under him, hovering his lips over Izuku's but quickly backing away when the other tried to fill the gap, making Izuku whine and hide his face in his hands. Katsuki laughed at the green-haired boy's reactions. If sro suizde, your dad if nice to you, Oni-chan. One of the kids said next to him, with a toothy grin that revealed a missing tooth in his upper mouth. Thanks, Izuku blushed at the innocence of the child's words. Our foreplay was anything but familial love. Katsuki on the other hand frowned at the comment. Not only was he peeved at being mistaken as Izuku's father, but he just remembered that because of the idiot duo. He had forgotten to get Izuku something. This day just keeps getting worse and worse. A bell rung, causing everyone to turn their gaze back at the water show to see a few animal trainers getting up on the island stage. With a loud splash, a large walrus jumped out from the pool, landing between the small group. It was easily the size of a small elephant, towering over each trainer. It walked around at the audience cockily before it started to shrink, becoming the size of a small house cat. A few of the audience members, especially the many children, ah-ed, and ooh-ed, at the sudden change in appearance. One of the trainers threw the now tiny walrus a large mackerel that was several times its size, and it gulped down the fish easily in one go despite its miniature size. The trainers raised their hands and gave the walrus a few hand signals. The walrus made a loud yapping sound before doing a triple back flip high into the air, transforming back to its original size as it landed into the pool and creating a massive splash that rained all over the audience. The crowd swallowed it and cheered loudly, some of them jumping up in their seats while others were clapping. The trainers whistled at him before emptying the rest of the bucket high over the pool. The walrus, who turned back into his smaller stature, jumped into the air and dived repeatedly, eating all of the fish before they had a chance to hit the water. When he had eaten the last of the fish, the crowd was thrown into an uproar as they clapped and cheered. He made an annoying bark that almost sounded like, "Worship me, please," while circling around the pool on his back. The crowd were laughing at the walrus' silly display before the trainers retired him back to his pen. PFF'd, Mineta scoffed loudly, elbowing both Katsuki and Izuku in their shoulders. Lame, am I right guys? Only kids would enjoy something like that. I mean, that walrus couldn't even throw balls as sticky as I do. Katsuki rolled his eyes, choosing to ignore the obvious attention-seeking purple midget. Izuku, on the other hand, was too much of a saint or just too blind to see Mineta's stupidity and did the one thing he wasn't supposed to do and responded to the attention-seeker. But you gotta admit, Mineta-kun, it's still a pretty impressive quirk to watch. I remember hearing something about most animals who have quirks being weaker than their human counterparts, probably because they evolved to have natural defenses and weapons while we just have our brains. There was a glint in Izuku's eyes and Katsuki could already tell that his partner was going into his quirk nerd mode. Don't forget our dicks, Mineta said, and Katsuki visibly groaned. Scientists say that humans evolved to have bigger dicks than any other animals. I guess. Izuku scratched at his chin with an index finger and chuckled lowly, backing into Katsuki's chest, whose eyes suddenly lit at the sudden weight pressing down into him. He unconsciously wrapped his arms over Izuku's shoulders. Case in point, Mineta sneered, a lecherous grin plastered over his lips from ear to ear. Mineta-kun, Izuku hissed in a quiet whisper. When the RPLE midget opened his mouth to add something else, he found Katsuki's fist flying into his face, caving it in. Mineta raised a finger as if he was about to say something, but then sat back into his seat and looked back at the stage. Face still pounded in. He was later set on fire seconds later. No one, not even Mineta himself, reacted to the sudden combustion and went back to watching the show. As the show went on, more and more of the other gang members had started to show. All of them sitting here and there, scattered amongst each other but close enough to Katsuki and co. Many of them were commenting on the various animals and their different quirks. Denki was really loving the swarm of lobsters that could turn their shells into rock, and Eijiro was really into the giant eel that could shoot lightning out of its body. Ironic with all things considered. Mezu was enthralled by a cuttlefish that had the ability to split itself and multiply, the normally soft-spoken giant being absolutely speechless during it all. Each of them were all enjoying certain aspects of the show, marveling at every little thing that was happening. Even Mineta stopped being an ass and just enjoyed the show like a normal person. Almost looking like the small children he sat with, although the huge bushy mustache gave his age away. Halfway through the show, Izuku and Katsuki were lost amongst themselves. Ignoring the chatter of their friends around them, just reclining back into their own world, separate from the rest. The two of them snuggled into each other, with Katsuki only taking small enough ice to the water, splashing them from the outside world so he could quickly dry the both of them off. Overall, everyone and the kids all enjoyed themselves. Despite the few setbacks, Katsuki was able to admit that it was kind of fun to hang out with the old gang and the kids. Not that he would ever admit it out loud. It might even have been funner than just the two of them hanging out alone, though. Being with the Deku has always made any situation 10 times better. When it was all over, the two of them waved their companions goodbye, each saying their farewells, although the gang's comments of coming to visit the shop more often was a bit disconcerting to the ashen blonde male. Now it was just the two of them and Tokiyami and his children. 2 boys and 3 girls were all holding Izuku by he hand with the rest of the children crowding around them. "We are going to miss you, Izu." The children started, tightening their hold on the green-haired boy's hand. One of them lifted his hand up to their face and used it to wipe his boogers and tears from his face. "I done want you to goes," he cried. Izuku chuckled weakly at the action but didn't pull his hand out of their tiny grips. "Please visit us und sensei at school when you cans," they pleaded. Izuku made a certain face but smiled at them. "Sure," he replied with a light laugh. "Whenever I can, I'll be sure to find some time in my schedule to visit you guys." Tokiyami came up and placed a hand over his shoulder, nodding at him and the children with a small grin. "Thanks for helping me take care of my kids," the crow-headed man said. "You really are good with children." He then leaned over Izuku's ears and whispered, "I'm sure you'll make a great father, don't doubt yourself." Katsuki stood there where he was with his arms crossed, raising a brow at how close Tokiyami and Izuku were but suppressed his jealousy. He was never fond of people whispering into each other's ears. Even more so when Izuku was involved. "By Izu ni! By Izu ni's daddy!" The kids all yelled loudly, waving their arms madly as Tokiyami and his shadow guided them back in the direction of the school bus to take them home. "What's wrong?" Izuku asked, half jogging next to Katsuki. "Oh, it's nothing." Katsuki sighed, just tired after all of that. "Hey." Izuku slowed his pace to a stop, forcing Katsuki to do the same. "Yes. Well." Izuku looked down at his feet and the blonde got closer to him, Katsuki leaning over him a bit but his eyes shot wide when he felt Izuku jump up and their lips collided. "Thank you for everything, Kachan," the younger man said before smiling brightly. Before Katsuki could say anything, he raced on ahead, leaving Katsuki speechless. "Thank you for everything." The words had mixed feelings in them. But while he couldn't decipher what all of those emotions were, he knew the one that mattered: love. He chased after his childhood friend, finally coming to a halt after a long-winded run. He saw the back of Izuku's head in the distance, reaching a hand out towards him, huffing and puffing. "There you are, you little bastard." "Kachan," Izuku said worriedly, turning to look at him and holding onto his hand. "Hello, Katsuki-kun. Midoriya-kun. It's been ages since we've last seen each other." A familiar voice broke around them. Katsuki could feel Izuku tense up. He looked over at the entrance to their home to see an older man with short dark hair. The other man was wearing a large brown trench coat and a matching trilby hat. The man just kept smiling at them. "Good to see you too. Naomasa Tsukauchi," Katsuki said slowly. A bit angry at seeing the man appearing at their doorstep. Now, is that something you would say to a friend, Katsuki-kun? The man continued smiling. Tsukauchi-san, what are you doing here? If I may pry. Izuku asked, nervously looking up at him. The older man began reaching into the inside of his jacket to pull something out. I'm sorry, Midoriya-kun, but I'm here on business. And it's a bit private. I'll need to speak to Katsuki-kun alone, if you don't mind. He said, holding his police badge out. Izuku bit his lower lips and hesitated, not sure of what to say. He looked back at his lover only to see a neutral expression plastered to his face. Kachan. Go inside, Izuku. I'll deal with it. Don't worry, it's nothing bad, I can assure you, Naomasa said. Still smiling, but it didn't help diminish his worry in the least. When Izuku opened the door and disappeared into the tea shop, the air around the two men got a bit thicker. Here it is, Naomasa said, handing Katsuki a few big stacks of paper. Is this? Katsuki started. Yeah, it is. Thanks, Tsukauchi-san, he said, though his voice and face still seemed to be neutral. No problem. I just wonder how Midoriya-kun will react when he finds out what you've been doing. And please, call me Naomasa, I think we've known each other long enough. Whatever, just fuck off. Katsuki waved him off dismissively before following after Izuku's trail. Naomasa just smirked at the ashen blonde man, pulling out a cigarette and lighting it. Still the same kid I remember, always such a troublesome guy. He threw the cigarette into his mouth before walking away, disappearing into the night shadows. Omake. Ochako was laughing with her two friends when something had caught her eyes. There in the distance among the crowd, she caught the familiar ashen blonde spikes of Katsuki Bakugo's hair. He was checking out some food at the cafeteria. Is that Kachan? She asks out loud. Huh, no way. Mina pushed past her and jumped up to try to get a better look at the man. It's hard to tell from this distance. Are you sure it's him? This is 20 miles from the tea shop. Suyu pointed out with a raised hand. Suyu-chan's got a point. But, do you see any hot green-haired boys around with cute freckles on his cheeks? Ochako turned around to look again, squinting. No. She replied when she saw no one remotely close to that description. Then, it's final, it's not Bakugo-kun. I doubt he'd ever show up in a family fun place like this unless Midoriya-kun dragged his ass here. Mina grabbed her friend's hand and dragged her through the crowd so they could get to the souvenir section. Come on, I wanna buy a shampoo doll. Ochako tried to get a peek at the blonde man again, but someone's head blocked her vision. She shook her head. Mina and Suyu were right. Katsuki would rather die than come to a huge place surrounded by happy families. Thanks for watching.